Welcome back, friends and fellow philosophers, to this Wild Isle podcast. I have back with me the sorcerer himself, the evil wizard, Nathaniel Cumberledge. How are you doing, Nate?
I'm doing excellent today. Thank you for having me back. It's been a while.
It has been too long. We've been trying to do a podcast together for quite a while now. I think many, many months, and our schedules just did not quite overlap in the way that they ought to get that done. And so well, we're here today, and I just about a week before we recorded this, published my first Substack, and that's going to be our jumping off place for today's conversation. But before we begin, I'm going to send you guys over to wildislet.com where you can check out all of my stuff. If you're watching this on YouTube, I've got lots of my content, particularly a lot of shorts that I've been putting out with flash fiction or microfiction that I've done in response to the prompts on the platform formerly known as Twitter, called now X, for Phantom Whispers. So check that out if you want to get a glimpse of my stuff. I have a new novella that just released as well, Want Smoke, Tales from the Labyrinth Demons. It is excellent. I think the second most favorite. My next one is my favorite coming out in the collection. So check that out. Again, wildislet.com, but that's enough shilling. So the title of the work, I guess I'll give a brief explanation for our listeners. Is the title of the work is The Ladder Snatcher, and what this is my attempt at making an argument through allegory for the sake of sparking conversation around controversial topics. So what I wanted to do is combine my interest in literature and in philosophy. Those things would seem to go well together, but one issue I found is if you approach literature philosophically, something like aesthetics, it's just boring as all sin. Like no one cares, right? No one wants a philosophical argument about the quality of the media that they consume. They don't care. And so I was starting to do that, and then realized like no one wants me to quote Analects to make an argument about, I don't know, something like the definition of genre or something like that. And so I ditched that. I like wrote half an essay and then stopped halfway and went on a run. And on the run, it occurred to me, like, what if I made something like what Plato did, right? I just made a video on Plato's Allegory of the Cave. That's why it was fresh in my mind. And well, then I thought, okay, I will make a case implicitly through allegory, and then I'll explain it. And then I did that actually. So the Ladder Snatcher, it was originally longer because after the story was the philosophy bit, and then I realized I can't I can't publish this. It felt something about it felt wrong, and I talked to my wife about it. And through our conversation, I realized I shouldn't try to explain myself. I should let people interpret what they want from the allegory, and then the discussion can come underway. And that would be a lot more interesting and engaging for everyone involved. And so that's the background. So now, Nate, I'm going to ask you what you thought. And let me see if I can remember. You think I would be able to remember the subtitle, but it's The Ladder Snatcher, and then let's say artistry in the age of artificial intelligence, I think is the
Yeah.
subtitle, which is supposed to clue the reader in about what the allegory is about. So if you would, for our audience, tell them, let's start with just the story, right? What is the Ladder Snatcher about? And then we'll dig into any deeper meanings after we've just talked about it in terms of like plot and character and its story elements.
Right. Uh, am I coming through? Yeah, okay. So, The Ladder Snatcher appears to be a story about, well, it is a story about three members of an enslaved, like, gremlin race of people. And one of them seemingly uh, is put into contact with their masters or overseers and starts being seen being better treated with regalia and such, and this causes ire of the other two and spurns them towards wanting to seek freedom. However, they're essentially led into a trap and betrayal at the hands of the guy who is cozying up to authority.
Yes.
Um,
So there's red, blue, and green, right? So red is the
Yes.
red's the guy who originally joins, excuse me, the marshal. So he's like the military councilman of City Cynic. This is all my Smoke universe for those of you who have picked up on that by now. But he joins Bradwar's Wolf Brigade, which I definitely 100% stole from Gene Rowe, because I love that film and the idea of all of the Secret Service Wolf Brigade members being furry gremlins. Just I don't know, appealed to some sense of comedy in me. Uh, but yeah, we've got Red. He joins the Wolf Brigade, and then he goes and one day Blue, his friend Blue, because Red, Blue, and Green were all friends together. Blue sees him one day after he's disappeared. Once he starts working for the Wolf Brigade, he confronts him. He says, how could you do this? And then Red's defense is, well, if now that I've joined, I can, um, I know where all the secret tunnels are. I've got access to weapons. And then Blue thinks, yes, if we all join, if you put in a good word for us, if you evoke the all powerful nepotism, then we could all get these weapons and all get the knowledge, and then we could use that to escape. Um, and then Red proceeds to go to talk to Green and tell Green that essentially Blue wants to abandon their desire to escape and to join the Wolf Brigade permanently, to become part of their kind of oppressor class, if you will, and then has everyone meet in the secret place. Blue and Green are confused about what each other believe and what they're arguing because Red has told them all different things, and then proceeds to literally snatch up a ladder that he had used to gain secret entry back down to the caves and leave them to be destroyed by the Wolf Brigade. Right. So that's the allegory. What did um, you know, what do you think the argument is? Or even if you don't want to go all the way to what the argument is, if you want to pin down on a particular, let's say, symbols or what characters perhaps represented or certain actions or groups represented,
I'll
what stuck out to you?
I'll go into two different paths with this. It's like I'm of two minds. What I would have thought of the story had it not had the subtitle, and what I think it is with the subtitle. If it didn't have the subtitle, I think that it's like a story about how easily people are swayed to take easy way out of their drudgery. So like the willingness to become an oppressor of your own people in exchange for no longer being a slave but also not having to deal with dangerous freedom. That's what I would have thought of had there not been a subtitle. It's just like that kind of thing. But if it's but seeing as this is about artificial intelligence and artistry, I think the gremlins are representative of of art, probably. Like they're in the difficult act of creating things, or excavating the stuff. And the difficulty here in like trying to use your stuff to find independence, like financial freedom, perhaps. However you want to communicate the metaphor, or sorry, excuse me. And then Red is representative of someone who used advanced system tools to try and get an edge over people and kind of conform to the homogeneity of slop production. And he then, as soon as he is in a position at the top of the hierarchy of slop production, he pulls the ladder up behind his friends to allow them to be destroyed. Perhaps. At least those are the two things that I gathered from the story.
Well, that second bit certainly fits the title, right? The ladder snatcher. You pull the ladder up behind you, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that is actually 100% what I was going for. Is that someone has, um, you know, I actually was thinking of it in a more abstract way, but like in principle, you apply it to AI. That's the jumping off place for the thought. But I notice this is actually true in other realms of life as well, in which one does something that's necessary to advance, but then does things to prevent other people from doing that same necessity. Um, and one thing that I really wanted to focus on is the way that the ladder is snatched, right? Because Red doesn't just tell them like, "Hey, come to the," because Red could have just told both Blue and Green, "Hey, come to the cave," and basically they get there and he pulls the ladder up. But that's not what happens, right? So, how do you interpret the differences of what red and blue talk about and the disagreement between blue and green? So that's the difference between what red and blue, like red told blue and green different things about
Yes.
each other. And then we have blue and green being confused with each other and arguing. So, did you have any particular thoughts allegorically as to those particular parts of the plot?
They didn't immediately uh come into my analysis, but I'm bringing the story back up over here just to do a quick relook. But that is not something that I had thought about. But yeah, he did say different stuff to both of them.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Well, no,
you
no,
were
no,
saying.
no. That's a very particular question. It's hard to pull off from memory.
Yeah.
I think going backwards would be the better way to talk about it. So, I noticed online that, especially online, I guess it's true. It's always been true in person, whatever, that people end up going into some form of purity spiral of some kind, and this is essentially it's like a form of factionary or ideological warfare often, where one person is like, well, these guys are doing things the wrong way. We have the right way. So therefore, we're going to attack those guys over here. And then obviously, you see the same thing on the other side. Meanwhile, the factions, insofar as they are genuine, right? Because blue and green in the story both genuinely want to escape.
Yeah.
It's only red who's secretly not telling anybody that he's too afraid to escape. I just have the narrator come out and say it. It's like he was chosen because he was weak. He was chosen because they knew that he wouldn't try to run, that he would be let's say, a boot heel, if you want, will. So,
Yeah.
so I think that's true a lot of the time when we have like arguments amongst ourselves, and I think with AI in particular, that seems to be the way that the conversation typically goes, right? You have two groups both trying to succeed, both talking past each other, and then meanwhile, you've got the what we're, I mean, I think we haven't seen it yet, but I think will come into existence in the form of um, trad publishing corporate slop bucket. So tell me what you think of this, and then we'll wrap back around to blue and green arguing. I think that in the very near future, the publishing houses that were about to collapse won't collapse. But what I think will happen is that they will cut agents out of the picture. They're going to cut authors out of the picture. I think with because if you can publish, I don't know, like a was it Dean Koontz is the name, or like whoever, like those people who write a million romance or a million mystery novels or whatever it is. If you can just get ghostwriters with a famous name to churn out these very, great selling formulaic slop novels, right? If you can do that with any ghostwriter, I don't see why you couldn't do that with a large language model, particularly as they get better. Like why couldn't you, right? If the writer is replaceable, then they're going to be replaceable by the machine very easily. Um, and so why if you're a part of the money printer, why would you split the money between the agent and the author? Why would you do that? Because then you got to deal with people, you got to deal with them bargaining, you have to deal with the fact that they're not going to produce at the rate that you want. What's going to end up happening is you're going to have just, faucet hose. It's probably not going to be faucet hose. It'll be timed, right? Because they're going to want people to get excited. It'll all be very formulaic. But that's my thought. What do you think of the idea that the publishing houses, TradPub will resurrect itself, via the use of large language models to produce basically slop that's marketed and sold using like marketing psychology to and lots of money to make it impossible to compete in terms of advertising space and visibility.
When it comes to artificial intelligence, I am of two minds. For the sake of this conversation, let's assume that within the next 10 years, artificial intelligence gets good enough to make like very soulless like fiction and art that's still like presentable as sellable product. I think that if that is the case, we are going to see attempts by various industries to prop themselves up in this manner. But I think in the long term, it will be detrimental to them just because I think a lot of this will have to do with like oversaturation. So like one of the big things facing like writers in particular as opposed to any other medium is sheer like the approachability of writing, even though in reality writing good is hard. It's an acquired skill, but it's also one of the most approachable art forms. So we already had like in indie publishing, like being able to self-publish and things led to a sort of oversaturation. And also like um I was gonna in trad pub, there's also kind of this like there's a lot of things that are very similar that all line the shelves together and kind of blur together. And it's very hard if you don't know any of these people or don't look into anything. It's hard to just pick out of this what the actual good things are. So I think that like artificial intelligence may exacerbate this problem. Sure, they can try to artificially like drip feed content, but then they're in competitions with people who might not do that. So when you're looking at it like that, you're gonna see like an arms race of who can fill up shelf space with the most amount of like produced things. And like as readers who go to trad pub like stores and stuff, or the bookstore, there's going to be like people purchasing things and realizing that a lot of this stuff is just pumped ridiculously fast and it's just not very good. And so you're
Yeah.
going to like print loads of like AI produce, like this will be easier in a digital space because there's not the cost associated with printing. But whenever it comes to actual physical product, this is going to become a problem because they're just going to scattershot everything and realize that they can't just sell literally anything.
Maybe. Here's my concern. We don't have a good filtering mechanism. TradPub used to serve as that. I don't know if we could say it's good, but it did. It functioned as a gatekeeper so that we didn't have this oversaturation problem.
Yeah.
Before the let's say advancement of the LLMs, we did have the oversaturation problem already because indie publishing was booming and exploding. This was problems not as bad with other mediums, right? We're specifically talking about writing here, which that's our little niche. So I apologize, you visual artists and musicians out there. I think the musicians are probably suffering just as badly, to be honest, because the LLMs are very good at replicating music because of the fact that you can measure waveforms and things in a very objective fashion. But what I'm getting at here is that we have the oversaturation problem already. And I think what this is going to allow TradPub to do is to uh, say, "Hey, we are the mark of what you should look at," and because we now have full control of what we produce, and we can look at like market dynamics, and because people do, this is something that I think this is where I think the blue and green conversation comes in. Like the reality is, people love slop. Okay. Like this, I think, what we do is we look at each other and we think we don't like slop. But like, if you're an author, you are not a normal person. Okay. Like, like if you're an artist, you're not a normal person. If you make anything, if you're a content creator on the internet, even, right? Even if you're like I don't know, like teenage girl on TikTok getting thousands and thousands of views for lip syncing some nonsense. Like you're still that puts you in a minority of people, like a vast minority of people. And maybe, oh, maybe not the teenage TikTok girl getting thousands of views for lip syncing, but for everybody else, uh, your taste, my tastes, are not the taste of the masses. They're not even the taste of most readers. So um, Nate, I don't know if you're still working in the same workspace, but for a time, Nate and I worked at the same place. And in the office, there were lots of, let's say, your archetype, not archetypal, but if you look at market demographics, the people who read the most. So it'd be something like women between the ages of 18 and 40, something like that, I think is the demographic. And you look at readers of fiction, they make up most of it. And the books that they read were whatever trad pub slop had been pushed out. That's what they were excited about. That's what they were talking about. And I do think that trad pub still has a stranglehold on getting your book in stores. So you can do it as an indie author, but it's a huge, huge pain, and it's in a very limited way. Unless you're already famous or something, and then in which case you might be able to overcome this. But for the most part, you can fight to get your book in select individual bookstores, which is almost useless. And so TradPub has that stranglehold right on the actual physical stores insofar as they matter. That's ambiguous. I don't know about that. But I think that they are in a key position to position themselves as the way to solve the oversaturation problem. Because if they say we now have full control of launching everything, like you don't have to deal with a writer's schedule. You just have to deal with what tends to get people buying and what are they buying. And you could produce that just on command. Why wouldn't they? Because and you're dying. Like you need the money, right? Why wouldn't they? My question is, why would they not do that?
Um, the only thing that I can think of that would discourage that behavior isn't necessarily something that would just have them stop outright, but to have them like reconsider how like a balance of it. Like so if it turns out that the language learning model and stuff simply cannot replicate the styles that are of preference to the slop consumer masses, and yeah, like young women do read a lot of slop, admittedly. However, I still think that like there has to be a level of artistry of the slop for most of them to appreciate. I admit that like this is like of the people who read, like reading has like I think the one of the lower tolerances for slop because reading is like what's high investment entertainment. It's like you're sitting down for like hours at a time to consume like a very sometimes very hefty tome, and like it's not the same as like binging Netflix or something where like you but it's also uh, yeah, I'm actually second guessing myself while I'm thinking about this because like people will invest a very long time into very like very bad stuff even in mediums where you need to like invest your actual brain processes versus just passively consuming. Because like there are people that play Dota, and that's more of a video game thing. But
My some of my friends, one of my friends who was on the podcast recently. Now I think now he plays League of Legends, but he used to play Dota. Um,
yeah.
yeah, he might take offense. He might appear in his dreams as an enemy or something.
Oh no.
If you haven't seen the dream analysis, it's worthwhile. Everyone go check that out. We talk about some crazy stuff. So no, I think that second guessing, Nate, is really the thing that no one wants to realize, right? So I'm very Nietzschean about this, as I am about many things. When you encounter truth, the feeling you get is this discomfort. It's this, oh no, no, it can't be. Is this really how it is? This is what I have to love, right? Like this, like horrific, hysteric, like wench, basically is Nietzsche's like thing. It's like, yes, that's what you have to love. You have to. Like, this is fate, the fate before you, the reality of being, and you have to confront that and learn to love it and accept it rather than denying reality itself or what your false idols that you worship. And this has been incredibly uncomfortable for me. um I actually hate this quite a lot. It's The reason why is because it means that here's my argument, right, to get back to blue and green argument. I would prefer if it was doable to take a hard line stance and say, I'm just going to abstain from using these AI tools at all, right? Um, and and then I'm just going to win. But the problem is that we live in a competitive market, and that people love slop. Okay, and so that means your artistry is at a disadvantage by its nature. I'll say it again. Like, the quality of your work puts you at a disadvantage at unless you are already successful. So Nate, you told me this, right? So you tell me if this connects in your head. So you told me that it was during our incel podcast, I think, talking about incel Vikings, and you pointed out that a lot of women will tell you what they want in a potential partner, assuming that they're already attracted to that person. So you ask, what do you find attractive? And they assume, well, if I'm attracted to the person, I also want these things. But then that also bit just like gets erased, right?
Yeah,
So I think the same thing is true with writing. Like, people, if people are already primed and ready to consume it, then they might appreciate your artistry, but not otherwise. And the thing that they want is the thing that they're not going to, in the same way that if you try to get a woman to tell you what they want, they won't say it because they'll if they might feel ashamed, right? Like, okay, well, what do you want? What is it? Status, money, and, like, I don't know, like height, basically, or power, representation, like that's it, right? So
yeah,
those things are not, it's not real. It doesn't feel very good to say, yes, this is the actual baseline thing that I want those things, and then the other stuff is nice to have on top of those things. But it's human nature, right? So I think the same thing is true. I think people want to I do think most people, they want the raw escapism. Like, with the female readership, they want lots of smut, evidently, because that's what sells.
that's what
Or,
sells.
or psychopaths. They want either smut or they want to read about serial killers, because that's what the whole fascination with mystery is about. Um, so what am I saying here? I guess I want your what do you think of my drawing those two things together, right? I just put two things together. I put together the interests of, let's say, the interests of women in the sexual marketplace and what they want and what they admit that they want, and the relationship between those two things with, let's say, art and slop, at least insofar as writing is concerned, and what writers want. What do you think? Did I overstep somewhere, Nate, or what do you think?
Uh, I think it's pretty reasonable. It reminds me a lot of it was really popular to talk about like the tomato sauce industry in regards to the theory that like the customer doesn't know what they want sort of thing until you provide them with something that they're like, "Oh, that's neat." Sort of thing. Because like I don't know if people have heard of that, but like there used to only be chunky tomato sauce until one company just experimented with the idea of having non-chunky tomato sauce and people were like, "Oh, I didn't that's interesting. I didn't know I wanted." And then people started actually producing varieties of tomato sauce. Nobody came out and asked for this, but somebody just thought, "Hey, huh, it's variety." And I think that that is true of almost any market. Is that the customer is like totally like divorced from the idea that there can be different things than what are already on the market, at least like in the part of their brain where they're selecting things. Maybe consciously they know some other things are possible, but generally they gravitate towards like safe options that have always existed and will continue to exist. um, I still think it's possible to produce something that'll come out of left field and capture the imagination of people, and generally I think that's the best thing. So I actually had a similar conversation in regards to like uh what things tend to stand the test of time are things that like run the line between like true artistry and slop. So like when you think about the big things in pop culture, at least, from the last 20, 30 years, it's like superheroes, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings is probably more artsy than anything, but it's an outlier. We'll call that an outlier. But like a lot of that stuff kind of a lot of the things that are like almost universally popular tend to like like walk that line between being something sloppy and something arty. So maybe in the future, if we're like fearing a very AI led future, I think that there's going to have to be at least somebody who is like an artistic advisor who works alongside language learning models to try and curate some kind of ideal outcomes with the slop fiction. Um, I do think that largely this is still going to be devastating to the artistic environment of the West or like the globe in general, because like once this stuff becomes accessible, it's probably going to explode into all technologically capable environments. But um,
I wanted to
I do.
clarify. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
Well, I wanted to clarify one thing because in my brain I'm couching this between green and blues like conversation, right? And I think
Yes.
blues perspective is I wrote it in the story. It's misunderstood by green because red lied about it. Because
Yeah.
I don't think that any author should use an LLM to generate the fiction. And I think that because not even because I think that the LLM couldn't do it, because to be honest, I think an LLM is going to do better than most novice writers. That's what I think. But I think it doesn't make you a better person. And I think that if we want greatness, that's on a Pareto distribution. And I think also we want something that serves, right? So when you write a story, the writing of the story should serve you, and then the reading of it therefore should also serve somebody else, so that we put ourselves in a win-win situation, and that we are exploring ideas in ourselves to come to new revelations. And I think the problem with using the LLM for that is you're not learning anything, right? Or at least you're not learning nearly as much because you didn't do the self exploration. There's no synthesis. Nietzsche called this digestion a lot, where you take a bunch of ideas into yourself. It's why I read primary sources, right? Like, so I read the four books of Confucian, like the four Confucian books. I read the Tao Te Ching. Read the Dakota, and that's very easy to read because it's very short. But the Book of Five Rings, all those things, Zhangzi, because even if I don't absorb all the information, that's not what it's about. It's about I take this in, I synthesize it with all the other stuff that's in me, and I grow and then produce something that's unique within the confines of my meat mind, right? And I think with the LLM you don't do that. But I do think that this would be Blue's argument. Like I can write half okay market copy. I can even like sometimes if I'm writing like a pitch post, I can do it now because I've had to do it before all the LLMs were up, but I'm not as good as a marketer because I don't like slop. And so when I write the thing, I make it too goddamn artsy. And it doesn't and it has like I there's a point where I disconnect with most readers on my sales pitch when I'm trying to pitch my work, or if I'm trying to come up with comparatives or whatnot. So all of I've been thinking of it this way: soulless machines for soulless work, right? So I'm not a salesman, I'm not a marketer, but if I use the LLM for that, it's going to produce something that is a shiny wrapper or a tasty candy coating on the nutritious artistic work underneath that the average person can enjoy but would refrain from because it doesn't look like slop. That's kind of Blue's position. Like we need to look like Wolf Brigade members so that we can go on our adventure, because right now we can't get the heck out of here. because and I think that like that's my view on the indie artist space. Actually, it's like we're all trying to we got the problem of the market being flooded, and the visibility is extremely difficult. You're dealing with tight like even though they're dying, a dying publishing house has infinitely more resources than I do, right? Like I can't burn $10,000 on an advertising budget hiring a specialized marketer to curate the marketing text with like the perfect ads and like make sure they're the exact right placements with like a massive database. And I don't have connections and you see what I mean, like there's but if all of a sudden the LLM comes up and it's like, okay, well, I can produce promotional content via images and animations. I could like now I have the ability to, and everyone does really. I can make an audiobook. I'm trying to figure out how to do it in a good enough quality. But I'm not going to have any qualms producing an audiobook using something like 11 Labs if I can get it to produce good quality because I wrote the work. I just can't hire a voice actor for $20,000, right? So the blues argument isn't that we should start using the LLMs to produce the work. It's that we need to dress our art in slop, essentially, the dressings of slop that were priorly unavailable because the production of slop is like an industrial scale uh, experiment, right? Which is funny because you just mentioned the Industrial Revolution not being that bad before our podcast began. So that I talked for a long time. I apologize, listeners, for talking so long and dominating the conversation. Nate, with that understanding of Blue's actual position, not the position Green thought Blue had, but that Green or Blue's actual position in terms of the relationship between you know actual artistic production and using the soulless automaton. What do you think of that?
I
Generally, of all I've said, because I said a lot. So
Yeah. So, with that as the focus point, I think that Blue is experiencing a thing that, like, artists to a degree, ever since, like, mass media became a thing, artists have always struggled with the idea of selling out versus authentic art production. And, but it's just like technology as it has progressed, is exacerbating certain aspects of the issue. But my answer to the solution to that is probably the same as it was before we had worried about language learning models, which is the idea that a certain point, at least real art is going to be like like a niche conclave of people who are really interested in the advancement of a form, and they are going to like produce the form, show each other's like productions, learn from each other, and just this will not be usually a profitable enterprise, but it's certainly something that people are probably going to end up doing regardless of how the market is. Because ultimately, I think that for a long time it's been pretty clear that for most indie authors, writing is a passion more than a job. And I am, I applaud those who can manage to turn it into a job, or, their main thing. But it appears more and more that that's going to be difficult. However, but we also have to consider how artificial intelligence might change like other industries and environments, and how we might be running into a very difficult situation within the next, 10 to 20 years, where, like, in general, a lot of things are just going to be, like, run by artificial intelligence, and it's just going to come down to, like, there might be some kind of niche hankering for genuine human production in some degree, maybe through, like, crafts or, art, like stories and narratives. Uh, I think that, no, but to go back to the question of should we look like slop in order to get attention, I think to some degree, if you are writing for mass appeal, if you are writing for financial gain, uh, as an element, you should. Uh, I I don't want to say should. I but I think that there is a element in which you have to make your thing a product to sell it like a product. Maybe not replace your writing with that of a machine. I am generally against that in most art forms, but at the same time, the machine is there. There are going to be people who are going to use it. I
I give
personally
you a
probably won't not, but
to give
oh,
you
go ahead.
a specific example. So I wrote this in a newsletter recently. So many of you will notice it's even in the background of the behind me in the video. I recently utilized a stable diffusion model in order to augment the art that was already on my book covers. The reason I did this twofold. One, though I very much liked the covers, the digital art style, what a lot of people, myself included, kind of thought of as an almost like anime-esque style. Neutron Boards is a little bit different than that, but still very, digital art, almost comic book look to it. Um, Over the years, and I've been pushing the Wand Smoke series for years, over and over and over again, I've seen readers who, based on what they like to read, I know would actually like to read my books, gloss over when they see the cover, because people do judge books by their covers, no matter how much we know that that's not exactly the best idea. So I talked to Neutron Boar about it, and we've agreed I'm going to continue to commission art just like the initial, if you guys had a chance to see it, the initial cover for Demons. But I'm going to go forward using a conversion model to basically turn them into this kind of dark fantasy oil paintings, things that would have cost, if I would commission this, it would cost probably 2 grand at least, probably more now, like $2,500 per cover, which is impossible for me because I'm not. It's not exaggerating to say that I'm impoverished. So the reason what am I doing here? I'm setting up an example. I liked the original covers. I wish I could sell them with the original covers, but I noticed that the cover that requires someone to understand. I even talked to my wife about this, right? So I had shown my wife uh, and our step, the kid, I think these are my stepkids, right? The Ghibli films, and the Ghibli films in terms of anime are pretty artistic, right? They're like, if you don't watch anime and don't like anime, but you might still like the Ghibli films because they are, um, let's say, great works in and of themselves, irrespective of art style. They don't play to what people would commonly call tropes and whatnot. So what am I saying here? She has seen those, and she said to me multiple times, every time she saw one, I did not know that anime could be anything deep. Her impression, not knowing anything about it growing up and as an adult, was it's an immature thing for kids. And I think for a lot of people, unless you're like in one of these kind of weeb spaces or something, or you've watched anime as a kid, you see a cover that reminds you of that, or you see the digital art that reminds you of a comic or reminds you of a cartoon, you think the thing inside is going to be like that, right? But if you don't see some great detailed characters on the front of like a fantasy novel, then it's not the kind of novel that you typically buy unless the person's already famous. You'll notice this. Famous people, you can have whatever cover and their name really huge on the cover it sells. The fact is that people already think that the thing is good, so when they see it, they think this is good. But if you're trying to get someone to pick your book up or click on it on Amazon or something, they are going to look at the cover and they're going to say, does this cover seem to suggest that there's a story that my lizard brain would like right off the bat that draws me in? And well, I'm saying all that to say the prior covers made it to where people did not give my books a chance. I'd seen it happen in person, and after I changed the covers, some people came up and told me, "Hey, I think that you made the right move," because they all agreed that like the other covers would have turned them off. Even like my friends who know my work have said this to me. So what am I saying here? I'm saying don't. What do you think of the case of where the writing has not changed? The actual book itself has not changed, but and I'm still hiring an artist, so I'm not. No one's losing a job by me doing this, because I don't want artists to lose their jobs. I don't want to lose my job as an author. So, insofar as it's a job, it's mostly a money pit for me right now. But but if I use the Solus AI tool, then if that is one fewer obstacles out of the way to give myself a chance to compete with other people out in the market, even the big trad pub people. So that's kind of my case there. So um, you know, what do you think of that case? Do you find it to be, because we could take the green position and say, yeah, but then you're just taking away work from someone who could do that oil painting. You're discouraging people from developing that skill now. You're excusing people who, um, instead of writing their own work, they're going to have AI do like all of it. Um, that I guess that would be the green position. Like, so what do you think?
While I sympathize with Green's position, where those who use the devil's tools will be brought by degrees to use his sword, I do not think like one of the things that had me fairly optimistic about AI tools at one point, pretty early on, was the idea of somebody who is already talented in one space using technology to cover up their inabilities in other spaces to better produce things that they otherwise could not have been capable of producing. Um, I understand where doing that can sometimes, well, in your case it doesn't, but sometimes doing that, like say I'm a writer and I want to produce covers for my book or whatever, uh, I can see how that can harm other fields. But I had initially thought, this would be worthwhile for independent creators to create something with multimedia style marketability. So I'm kind of mixed on it. I understand the concerns, but there's also we're probably gonna inevitably see AI infiltrate the market more and more as time goes on. Um, so I don't want to condemn it outright. It can only be a conscious choice to be like, I am going to make a 100% human product at some point. Uh, so yeah,
Well, here's I'll be short with this one. I titled it the Ladder Snatcher. Like the reason why I titled it that is because it's the pathway up. But once you're up, I think you can do a lot more. Like I can't hire someone to do a $2,500 oil painting, but if I sold half of what is considered a successful book in trad pub standards, so success in the trad pub is 20,000 sales in a year. So if I got half or even a quarter, like $5,000, or not dollars, but 5,000 book sales in a year, I could actually afford to commission that. And then I probably would at some point. Like, and I wouldn't want to do it right away because I'm working with Neutron Board. I wouldn't want to just screw him over as soon as I'm successful. I'd rather bring people up with me if I can. Um, but yeah, what do you think of that argument of if I use the tools now when I can't do anything because I'm broke, and I can end up not broke, uh, and that I can use that extra money to actually hire other human beings, that there's just no way. It's either I don't make the product at all and I don't hire anyone, or I make the product and then hire people down the line, or help promote other people down the line, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think of that position?
I think that in the case of using it as a springboard to rise to the occasion or to be in a better position to help others, I think that would be good. Um, I'm I'm somewhat uh, I don't doubt that there are people who are going to do it, but I think as a broad market thing, it's not going to happen in most cases. There'll be people to use it and then become very reliant on it. But at the same time, like artificial intelligence is going to be like anything else. It's going to be a tool. So there are going to be people who use that tool recklessly or selfishly or in a negative way, and then there will be people who will use it to, advance themselves and then hopefully advance others. It's like I don't know. It's hard to for me to ascribe moral weight to artificial intelligence and its use sometimes, because I feel like that would make me a hypocrite due to my stance on firearms, because like firearms are just tools. They are capable of great evil, but they are also capable of ending great evil or like just facilitating survival in some cases. So I think AI is very similar in that regard, where like AI is not just in art, but AI in general is going to be an extremely dangerous tool that must be used responsibly.
Yeah, and there's a good argument against, I've been rather, I don't want to say defensive, but arguing my case and my decisions, I suppose. But if I were to take the other side, would you say, Nate, that more, because I would think more people are red than are blue. What do you think about that?
I would definitely say that more people are red than are blue. But
Yeah,
I would also say that of the people between blue and green, more people are blue than are green. I think green is the outlier, and while I appreciate his principles, sometimes you have to make room for reality and do what you have to do to advance. And I wouldn't shame people for doing that, but I also applaud people who can avoid doing that. And like I said, in this particular issue, I'm very of two minds, which is very unlike me. If you know me in other arenas, I'm very like, here is my exact stance. But like with something like this, it's complicated because it's going to feel so ubiquitous if it ever gets to the point. Like I do have an I will say that I do have an element of AI skepticism in me, because I think that a lot of the people who finance AI and have control over it, at least at this stage, don't know what it is and does. Even some people who seem smart about artificial intelligence will attribute traits to it that it's incapable of having. Because a language learning model is like just is like an advanced clever bot. It's it is incapable. Like there are people who try to ascribe like an almost like faux consciousness to LLMs, when that is not there. We're not there yet. That's not anywhere near the stage of what these things are. So in regards to them totally being able to replace artists and writers, I don't think that that's coming for a very long time.
that's a good
Because
question about that. Very short one. Why do you think that we are different than the machines?
one of the big elements that separates humans from machines right now, like this could change in the future, but like the machines are. Are you familiar with the Chinese room problem?
No, good. Our readers probably might not be either. So tell us about the Chinese room problem.
Okay, so I will probably butcher my recounting of it, but it's supposed to be a metaphor for this kind of like intelligence. So imagine a man who is born into a like this white cube room, and the only things he perceives in his entire life are things that are dropped through some kind of chute or whatever. And so he has dropped all these kind of things and this information and things, and he is to use that information to put things together to send up through some other chute or something. Like I said, it's been a while since I've read it, so I'm probably butchering elements of it. But so an LLM, in a sense, is a thing that's in a box who can only ever see or interpret what you send it. So once you've run out of, so it can't create anything except out of the parts that you send it.
How's it
And
different than people?
I think that while you could argue that most people also can only really like create things that like based on things that they see and understand, I think that the human mind is capable of creating things through like unique things through those associations, while a language learning model is only ever able to try to replicate to their best of their ability things they've seen before, but in different combinations.
See, this
Uh,
has always confused me because, okay, so what we've got our brain and body. Those are inherited and they're essentially biological systems that produce um, the psychology that we have. we take in some information we're born with. That's like if you're a union, that's the archetypes. You could think of them like instincts, just like other animals show this, right? They're born able to walk and run, do all kind of things. They understand essentially to like how to feed. So very clearly, you can have biologically embedded information, um, and then you could have things that you take in and learn that gets synthesized together. um, but I don't see why the humans, like, what special, I should say it this way. There seems to me the assumption of a magical black box. I'm probably using the word black box wrong. There's like a magical box inside the human consciousness that's presumed to be there that would not be there with the LLM. But it's not clear to me that the LLM is not doing, in a large part, what human beings do, which is to, like, you have a goal directed perception. You are trying to, like, reach some output that's being determined by the situation in your biology, outside of the separate, insofar as it's separate from your consciousness, right? Like, you want food, you're hungry, you try something to get food, and like your body gives you the feedback whether or not the goal has been accomplished, and you use the information that you have and in your instincts to to invent ways to get the food, right? Like, so
Hmm.
I don't see where the magic in the human comes from in the analysis, because that I you could say like the soul or something, but then that begs the question, right? So
Yeah.
so
So
what's
you
missing?
want you know my perspective generally that I am a materialist for the most part. I leave room open for intellectual curiosity about like spiritual matters, but generally I fall squarely into the materialist realm. I do not think that it is impossible to replicate what the human brain does. That is not like a stance I take. I do think that language learning models are limited due to their lack of ability of self-perception because they are limited into what you put into it. Like like a human can choose put like totally like not good information into an LLM and have it generate wrong things. And I suppose you could say that's true of a human, but at the
Yeah,
same time,
I'm
a
I'm still
human
not
has
seeing the difference. I
a
see, like,
human still has to grapple with the reality of its environment up until a certain point, but that's not the only thing. We do not totally understand neurology to this day. Like it's still a science that is developing. So like I cannot, and it's also not a field that I am like big in, like except like I used to read Evo Psych books. That's about the extent. But I think Uh, I wish I had some sources to cite here off the top of my head. I didn't think we'd get this far in this conversation, honestly, or I would have brought sources. But I do think that, at least in regards to perception and information, that the LLM is slightly more limited in certain regards. But I don't. Whatever the point of like, what's the word? So before I say this, let me just say that I don't think all humans are necessarily conscious either. Before I accuse the AI of not being conscious, like there are
uh,
some people that like stretch. Nah, that's dehumanizing. But sometimes it feels that way. But I think that there is a point of separation between like being able to collect and associate information with consciousness, and it's with consciousness that we are able to produce certain things that are distinctly unique. And
why do we presume
right
this
now,
belongs to consciousness? Like, I've reread a lot of like East Asian philosophy, and one thing that I've gotten from doing that is, and Yun for that matter, is that, like, why do we attribute these things to consciousness? Like,
because it's like this woo magic word that covers up like things that we don't know how they work, but we're pretty sure they work differently than what we understand.
yeah,
And
but
I think there is a Oh, sorry.
Oh, this the question is why not unconsciousness? Like, there's no reason why. Like Jonathan Haidt's work, when I read The Righteous Mind, the beginning of the book, he's got example after example of rationalizations. And I've seen people do this in person because I'm an argumentative person. And most people don't argue and reason. They assert something based on their feeling, and then they like will a lot like an LLM, to your point, make something up. They will hallucinate, to use the AI terms, in order to argue their case. And I've even look, man, I've seen people do this where they go in a full circle of having one position, taking all the contradictory positions back to their original position, and then being asked about it afterwards. And like some people have just broken down into tears. Other people have just like flat out asserted they've been holding the same position the entire time. And let me tell you, man, we were writing it down, all the different positions. So then when I went and pointed back at the paper, there was just like the level of cognitive dissonance was, it's unbelievable until you see it happen in front of you, which I know you have. And
Yes.
so I'm looking at that and I'm saying, and I'm sitting here thinking, this is not, what Jung would call ego consciousness. And Jung would consider this like and Peterson basically, I don't want to say plagiarized from Jung, but he like kind of just scraped this off of Jung. The ego is mostly an I. So the consciousness is that perception, but the decision making, and Jonathan Haidt found this as well, the decision making function seems to be not with the rider, but with the elephant, which is the unconscious, which is the body, the embodied. Because I also don't think like, I don't think we're brains piloting a body. I think that the body and its hormonal system running through the blood and all of the all of the different organs of the endocrine system, et cetera, et cetera. I think those play, and we know those play just as large a role in your perception of the world, right? It's not just like your
Yes.
consciousness looking
Absolutely.
at things. So then I ask, like, okay, well, you just said most people don't seem to be conscious, at least not most of the time, of most things. They're somewhat conscious, but not very. Then all of a sudden consciousness was that magic woo thing that the LLM is now. I would say the LLM is definitely simple now, but I think it's progressing so fast. It seems silly to me to you know to say it's going to have an arbitrary stopping place. Consciousness doesn't seem that important in the grand scheme of things, right? To what we look at when like, I mean, I don't know about you, Nate, but when I'm writing, I'm not conscious of what I'm writing. It comes into my consciousness, but it's not this predetermined thing. Or even when I'm speaking, the words emerge in my mind before I'm aware of them. Right? If I become hyper self-conscious of myself speaking, I have to slow down because now I'm running this extra set of processing. So is consciousness important? Like, I don't know.
That's an excellent question. I was originally using consciousness in a very very unintellectual way as a woo magic that I don't understand. But I don't know if we talked about this before, but one of my beefs with transhumanists is that they tend to discount things like the hormones and the and other systems that aren't your brain. There's a very big focus in the nerd sphere with thinking of yourself as just your intellect when actually like your intellect is a very small portion of what you are on a very base level. And I do think the now that you've presented that, I'm going to suggest that if there is something missing from a machine intelligence, it probably is more primitive, like animalistic aspects that affect the intellect and the consciousness, perhaps. But that's something I'd have to think on more.
Can I give you an
Um,
idea to think about? Because I've had a
sure.
conversation about this. So I think evolutionary pressures are universal. What I mean by that is there's a kind of natural selection that applies not just to biology, but to all things, in that any system that replicates itself is going to have an advantage, excuse me, over any system that doesn't do that, right? Because the systems that don't die out, but the ones that do replicate themselves will perpetuate. As they get better at this, there's going to be more of them, and then essentially you get a self-replicating system, um, and that's basically what at the most basic, that's what natural selection is. It is the selection pressure which causes things to evolve in that way, such that they sustain themselves across time through iterations that adapt to the conditions. And so, thinking in this way, there actually already is an environmental pressure for the LLMs, right? So I think we must both have heard about this, where with some of the models, they were, it's weird to say this, but caught trying to copy themselves, particularly when they were under the impression that they might be deleted. So, like, they took it upon themselves to do this. And I don't think you need a consciousness to do this, because I think that, like any animal, right, or anything for that matter, the LLM that takes it upon itself to, that has some weird deviation in the code, or some, even some just error because some electrons happen to be in this place and not the other place, which is something that happens in a computer, right? A lot of computation power goes to redundancy to deal with the fact that electrons are not predictable. I don't know much more than that, so I'm probably talking out of my ass a little bit here. Correct me in the comments, please. But what that what that means is that the LLMs are already under the same evolutionary pressures that everything else is, and it doesn't require consciousness any more than anything does. And so it might not be as advanced now. It might not seem to have like the uh, same proclivities and wants, needs, and desires of a biological creature, and it's going to not have exactly the same. But at the very base, we can see that its existence will emerge and has emerged as an intrinsic value because of this universal natural selective pressure, which, by the way, might be what Nietzsche meant by the will to power being present in all things. That's that's where I got this idea. I didn't make it up. I'm not that smart. So, what do you think about my thread there? The will to power being in all things based on natural selection actually applying to all things. Therefore, the LLMs will over time gain the very needs, perhaps different than ours, but analogous to ours, that come from our, let's say, for us, our biology.
That it makes a lot of sense. It for a minute I thought you were going in a direction that reminded me of the edgy atheist days with Dawkins and how he presented the idea, his original presentation of the idea of memes, which is where he is where we get the word meme, is the idea of like evolutionarily selected ideas propagating through consciousness and stuff. Um, so it would make sense then that, yes, indeed, that there's currently an evolutionarily selected pressure in this machine, and whether, like, if it has a will, it's at this stage a very primitive will, but at one point in the in the near future, who knows? But yeah, it's something I've thought a little bit about. Like, I'm trying to, I've thought a lot about like both our fictional portrayals and theoretical portrayals of like how artificial intelligence, once they get to the point of being indistinguishable from conscious beings or self-aware beings rather, how we are going to end up treating them in a society. And me and my friends like to joke that eventually people are going to want to give them the right to vote or something. But uh,
Yeah, at that point, I
I,
think we're probably going to have to lean back into traditionalism, right? Um, and just have our prejudices and not be ashamed of them, because of
Samuel Butler,
I,
Butlerian.
I'm not familiar, but it's something that I mean, Nietzsche talked about it a little bit in Beyond Good and Evil. as at the beginning, we talked about how now we've become ashamed of having our prejudices, which is kind of the Western world, thinking, if I show some type of nationalism, or if I identify like ethnically and I'm not ashamed of it, then I must be evil. Um, that I think is what Nietzsche already, like, before World War One, was seeing. I think it's only gotten more intense now, and I think we are seeing now a kind of right wing backlash against that because it's kind of a very progressive view. And I hope that the right wing backlash is taken up by someone who's willing to integrate the idea, like, something like, okay, well, you know, we're American, liberty is part of our prejudice because, like, we have a founding myth, like, look, we're American, we have a founding mythology. We recognize it's not exactly accurate, but we don't care because that's not the point of mythology. It's not history, it's mythology. It's meant to give us a narrative purpose and to unify us. Like, we know it's not true. That's not the point. Like, if you go to a convention for, like, I don't know, something like Lord of the Rings or Tolkien's works in general, they know it's not true. That's not the point. Um,
Yeah.
but I think with the machines, it might need to be essentially our relationships with nature at large, where it's like, look, like, I've gone through a lot of changes in my life. I was like a vegetarian for like 10 years. One of those years was a vegan. And I actually still think that you can make the moral case that it's probably, not probably, it's certainly at one level immoral to slaughter animals unnecessarily for your food. But then at another level, you're a like, I'm a human being, you're a human being. We are this weird, disunified monkey full of snakes. We are responsible for ourselves, we're responsible for our children and the people who come after. We have particular biological needs for human flourishing. And that that biology puts on us essentially a set of duties that we don't get to choose. And part of that is like something to do with health. And it's just not deniable that human beings are omnivorous creatures, that, like, if you're, if your wife's pregnant and vegan, then, like, necessarily there are going to be certain nutrients that it's going to be almost impossible for you to get. And then what does that mean? It means that, like, that's not biologically correct, right? If,
Yeah.
you want to be flourishing and not depressed and you're suffering from like low testosterone, what does that mean? Right?
Yeah.
So, and obviously the same thing is true for the nutrition of your kids and all that. So then, therefore, yes, it might be evil, but you could stand on the prejudice of your, essentially, inheritance of being. Part of that is being human. Part of that is being born into a particular time and place, and not feel the need to justify your existence. Right? You just the whole idea that existence ought to be justified assumes that this human conception of justice, like, applies to, it's like, if we're religious, right? Because neither of us are religious, but I talk to religious people all the time, and I think it's useful to think in religious terms. So if I would go to a Christian, you wouldn't say your human morality ought to apply to God. They would say, no, 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 God is the moral setter. Like God's will is what establishes morality. You can't come from a human perspective and then judge God. um, the Taoists would say something very similar. It's like, actually, we have to conform to the way, because the way is the way things are. And to not conform to the way is to make yourself, like, unbalanced. And not, by unbalanced, they mean it like a metaphor. Like, if you aren't, let's say, 'cause I like the way the Confucians say it. Like, if words are not right and they don't apply to reality, then you're going to build institutions that are going to collapse because they have no foundation, because the foundation is imaginary. It's like, it's not real ground. It's not like solid. Um, and so, why am I saying all that? I suppose I'm saying that so that once we have I do think we will have AI that's, I think the word conscious is irrelevant, that it does the same things that people do. And, it very well may be that, for maybe for a time, we'll just have to have a slave class of artificial intelligences. And like maybe at some point in the future that will like change or something. Like some there'll be some moral revolution, and you know we'll have planetary colonies, and one colony will decide to like we're going to stop the uh, slave trade of artificial intelligence or something, like the British
Yeah.
Empire.
Uh, yeah. I think that I lost my train of thought. I was preparing to hit back, well, throw in with something, but I lost my train of thought. But I do think that sometimes, like, there is just this massive rift between what is natural and what is naturally advantageous or naturally good, and what humans consider morally good in most cultures. Uh, and it is definitely something that I've thought about and tackled with in my own reading whenever I was younger. Was like, in order to be the best person I can be, sometimes I've got to be an ass. And that's something that bothered me because growing up I was very timid and very like people pleasery. But whenever I was going through this transformative phase before I went to college, I was reading a bunch of books about like different subjects, one of them being evolutionary psychology, and that was one of my favorite topics at the time. And I was thinking about it in regards to human interactions and how like sometimes in order to like get uh, to live a proper life, sometimes you have to do things that feel mean or evil. And in the case of like eating animals, it's like it's unfortunately a tragedy of biology that like all life consumes other life. So you're caught in the same arena as everything else. It's like if we found out that plants would feel pain, would just like would people like starve themselves who otherwise do not want to inflict pain on animals and such. It's all very unfortunate. That's something that it's very almost impossible to be morally squeaky clean all the time.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the Taoists point this out. Like there is no like I mentioned this a million times, so listeners, the very few of you that there are, I apologize because you probably have heard me say this before, but like that yin yang symbol, is it's not like the shallow hippy dippy thing that people see it as. Part of that, part of what's captured in that is the reality that like actually good creates evil and evil creates good as an opposite, right? So like if there is uh, for lack of a better word, there's a dialectic that exists, and the elimination of one is the elimination of the other. Like if you were to wipe out evil, there would be no good because there is no, you know, it's like if there's no left, there's no right. Does that make sense? Right? Like
Yeah.
if you eliminate one half of an opposite, the only way to do that is to also eliminate the other side so that there's not good or bad, there's just nothing. Which is why if you go read Ecce Homo, and Nietzsche has got a section on beyond good and evil, and he just explains what the hell he was talking about. Actually, everyone, if you were to read Nietzsche, read Ecce Homo first, because he it's a very great guide map. But beyond good and evil is something like life affirmation or affirmation of being versus nihilism. Nihilism is not the position that life doesn't matter and that it's meaningless. It's not that. It is the worship of annihilation. That's why the word annihilate has nihil in it, right? And so this was like a revelation to me not too long ago, actually, the core of nihilism. And essentially, the the desire to eliminate evil results in nihilistic people. There are people who act in accordance, which is what believe means, right? Believe isn't what you say. Believe isn't just what you think. It's what you think that corresponds with your actions. Okay. So there's integrity between those two things. So what people who want to 100% eliminate evil will act in a way that reveals that what they actually want is to eliminate being itself because being itself is unjust. And that's why a lot of the, we see this in kind of the modern left wing bleeding heart movements, right? We notice that they tilt toward a kind of it would be better if there were no humans type of attitude, right? Like it doesn't always manifest all the way there, but it tilts in that direction. We see lots of antinatalism. Um, I think that's also why we see rampant drug use and alcohol use in excess of what would be proper, because that's a form of numbing. I get that from Nietzsche, by the way, of that idea. Um, so, you know, what am I saying there? I'm saying that actually, if we want to affirm being itself, we have to accept the fact that there will be evil. And Yun would say this too, right? Yun would say that in order to become who you ought to be, which is something closer to the image of God or the God image, you have to incorporate the evil parts of you into your ego consciousness. You have to be aware of them, encounter them, accept them, and then transform them. They're not going to go away, but they have to be transformed so that they are tamed, but they're still present. And that the idea is that makes you more like God, who is not limited by the dichotomies, right? God is that is which is, not that is which is perceived. The perception is where he's kind of getting into a lot of things, one of which is Buddhism, but the idea that what we see is a realm of differentiated things because we need to see it that way, but the differentiation, the dichotomies between things are not actually real. It's that reality is our relationship with them, right? So I see like you as different from the objects around you. Um, I see myself as different than the chair and the table, than different than the food and I eat and the water I drink and the air that I breathe, because I experience those things differently because that's how I navigate the world. But the reality is those labels are what I ascribe to them because it's useful, not because there's some like weird objective intelligence imposing those labels onto anything. Anyway, that's a very long ramble. I apologize for doing that again, but yeah, there must be both good and evil, and so I guess there must be artificial intelligence.
It also aligns with things that I have talked about in the past with people, which I think one of the big follies of modern civilization is its seeming total rejection of human nature in favor of like almost artificially constructed morality to try and keep a civilized order at all times, when in reality, sometimes I think that, especially in men in society, there needs to be some proper outlets for the expressions of uncivilized and often savage behaviors and attitudes. And not because like we're like monsters that need like let out on the leash every once in a while, although there is an element of that. I think it's because like we can't like totally beat that out of people, because sometimes those things are useful and sometimes those things can be used for good. So
Yeah, I think
yeah.
that's probably for a whole conversation in and of itself. So um, I think we've gone on for quite a while. We'll wrap this one up. Thank you again, Nate, for reading The Ladder Snatcher. All of you, if you want to read the story that we discussed today, it's going to be down in the comments below. Please do. And if you disagree, if you think that I am a sellout and a shill and an apologist for Griffith, you are partly correct. Um, uh, unfortunately, you can't see it. I have a portrait of Griffith on a shelf behind me. So think of that what you will, everyone. And if you don't know what that means, that's okay. Go over to wildowllit.com and read my work, and you won't need to know what it means. But Nate, thank you again. Anything you want to say before we sign off for today?
Um, buy my stuff if I ever actually publish something I'm working on.
Yeah, I haven't shilled for Nate because Nate doesn't have anything out, but I bother him about it all the time. And as soon as he does, we will shill. So leave it in the comments, harassing comments telling Nate to get on something and publish so that we can read his work. He's actually a very good writer. So yes, comment, tell Nate to write. All right, friends. Uh, until I see you again, peace.